and
Right.
welcome to our nice little legal, I think you call it stand-up on contracting in SaaS. And actually not only about contracting in SaaS, we will talk about fast contracting in SaaS, of course. Yeah, as Alex said, I used to be one of these business disablers from the legal department for a mighty long time. I've been working as an in-house counsel in the tech and media industry for 15 years or something like that, among others, as already said, for Alex Meyer and Thomas Wilke at eCircle. And after I had learned enough about how to speed up and also, of course, how to slow down contracting processes, I packed my things and started a law firm to do exactly that out there in the wild. Also important for SaaS and SaaS contracting, one of my passions, actually my big love, is data protection. I'm well aware this sounds a little bit weird and kinky, but it helps a lot when it comes to closing IT contracts. Enough about me, let's get started. What's it all about here? I guess you all know the following scene. You run a lead through your perfectly designed sales funnel. The prospective customer loves your product. You have a perfect use case. Commercial discussions run smoothly. Everybody's happy. And then close to the finish line, this annoying legal paperwork comes in your way, and suddenly the harmony ends and the process gets, well, somehow bumpy and stuck. Suddenly you don't talk to your champion at the customer or the prospect anymore. This guy who really wants your fantastic app, but you have the pleasure to talk to this pretty unemotional guy from the procurement department and to this nitpicking legal counsel who both have no idea what your app is all about, and they don't even care how great your solution is. So in a nutshell, contract negotiations may definitely not be the most pleasant part of the sales process, but they are a part of the sales process, and I guess both good paperwork and preparation and good contract management is super important to get your deal through the procurement and legal bottleneck. And well, good contract templates and management especially is important for getting the deal done in time as well. And these are the two things I want to talk about here today. First, the boring legal part, what is important in SaaS contracts. I want to highlight just a few of these standard clauses in SaaS contracts and want to discuss how important they really are and if it's actually worth fighting for these clauses or if you have room to negotiate and can just leave some certain clauses go away. There are some points and clauses in a contract that are crucial, but there are also there's also a lot of mumbo jumbo in such contracts that's not really needed, and that's what I want to focus on here. Because there are clauses in every contract where you don't actually increase your risk if you just strike them out and let them go in a negotiation. And then when you survive the first part, I want to discuss how to cross the finish line quickly. In other words, how to handle the contracting process efficiently and to get customers' signature under your SaaS agreement just in time before quarter end, year end, before Christmas, or whenever it's urgent. And that will make your CFO and your investors, of course, happy, hopefully. And I guess that's what we all here for and what we all live for, of course. So looking at what is important in SaaS contracts, let's start with license and usage rights. That's the core of it all. That's what your customer actually pays for. That's, of course, the most important part for the customer. And it's, of course, also important for you. You don't want to give away any exclusive rights in your platform, and you don't want to give away too extensive, too broad usage rights for too little money. So there are, well, 2 or 3 little things that are important here. Your customer may only use your platform for its own business purposes, not for the benefit of third parties. And I think that's the important part. No sub-licensing to third parties, no agency model. You don't want to see your customer suddenly competing with you with your own platform, reselling your platform for a much cheaper price than you do. Usually also discussion, may affiliates, group companies use the platform. if you have a pricing model that's based on number of users, named or concurrent users, doesn't really matter here, that should be fine. If your pricing is more a flat fee, no matter how intensively your platform is used, then you definitely should restrict the right to use to your customer, to that legal entity you're contracting with only. Often also discussed, and a sticky point in contracts is about rights in customer-specific deliverables and work products. So when you build specific functionality, an individual API for one customer, the customer perspective usually is, I pay for it, I want to own it. And that's, of course, somehow understandable. Your perspective, on the other hand, is, well, I cannot limit myself in further developing my platform. And so I cannot give away exclusive rights to one customer, because then when I do that, I won't be able to use that specific deliverable, that part, that piece of code for other customers anymore. Or even worse, I won't be able to integrate it as a standard feature into the platform. You often have customers coming with great ideas how to develop, what to upgrade in your platform, and if you grant exclusive rights to one customer for that, that's really a dead end in that moment for the further development of your platform. You really risk here to limit the further development of your platform, and you don't want that. So either you say straightforward no here and explain why, and I think that's explainable and understandable. And by the way, often the customer will definitely not be able to use that specific deliverable, API, or whatever you've built for the customer with any other platform. So the exclusive right is of no use for the customer at the end of the day. It's really more a matter of principle in many cases. A compromise approach here could be to grant an exclusive right for a limited period of time, let's say 3 months, 6 months, whatever. And after that time, you can also use it for other customers or as a standard feature. It's kind of more a definition partnership perhaps, and customers often love to be definition partners. So that could be really a helpful way to get around this sometimes painful discussion and negotiations. Open source software. If you use open source software in your platform, you will have to talk about it in your contracts. If you use open source components, it usually will be the open source license that is applicable, not your license conditions anymore, and you will have to clarify that in your contracts. And almost all open source licenses require disclosure. That means you have to name the open source components and the respective license. Best practice, you may know that better than I do, is to have a list somewhere in your platform listing all the open source components and the respective licenses. Maybe a little bit off topic here, but nevertheless important. You definitely should keep your code under control. Open source software is important in every due diligence process. Identifying a copyleft effect in your code that makes your complete app open source with viral effect is not something that you want to go through in a due diligence process. Establishing a coding policy is a great thing. Let your developers know how important it is to properly document what they use and what kind of code with what kind of license they build into the platform. Another standard checkbox in most procurement checklists is the lovely topic of acceptance. Acceptance means you develop something for your customer, you have predefined criteria you have to meet, then you raise your hand and say, I'm ready. And then the customer tests what you've built. And if everything works according to the predefined criteria, well, then it's accepted and everybody's happy. And hopefully you get paid for the work you've done. In such cases where the acceptance criteria can be predefined, acceptance makes sense, but acceptance doesn't really work for software as a service. You usually don't build or develop something individually for a specific customer. For SaaS, you usually don't have customer specific customizations and individual developments. You often have maybe kind of a configuration phase where you, together with your customer, set up the platform according to the customer's dreams and wishes, but that's usually more a collaborative process, and this formal acceptance thing that doesn't really work for us here in the SaaS world. So try to avoid acceptance for your standard platform. Usually all the nice stuff like invoicing and payments are subject to acceptance, and acceptance, or better, missing acceptance, can delay getting paid for ages, and that's not really nice. So unfortunately, as I said, acceptance is a standard checkbox in most software procurement checklists, and the procurement guy simply needs to have something here to be able, well, to check that box in his checklist. So the simple approach here often is keep the acceptance clause in the contract as it is, but add something like, if acceptance is explicitly agreed in an order form, then the following acceptance process starts, and then the clause comes. And in the real world, acceptance almost never is explicitly agreed in an order form, and nobody will ever think of this clause again. I think generally you can say that it's often a good solution for critical points in contract negotiations to simply, well, transfer and postpone the point to a later commercial order form, where then often is simply forgotten or usually not relevant anymore. And usually also the annoying legal guy will not be part of the discussions around the order form anymore. So if you postpone some points to the commercial order form to a later point in time, the legal guy can accept that. His job is done. He can lean back and everybody's happy, and you don't have to agree some critical points here during the contract negotiations. Also a good way to get around certain critical points in contract negotiations. Service level agreements. Also, of course, definitely a checkbox in every SaaS procurement checklist. If you say nothing about availability, you owe 100%. That's why remaining silent is not the perfect idea here. And if you say, well, 99.5 or 99.9, whatever, the million-dollar question always is, what happens if you fall below this minimum availability? I'd say try to avoid service credits on the first level, but have something ready if a customer insists on service credits, and that often happens because it also makes sense somehow. And this may not be the greatest wisdom, perhaps, but please let me nevertheless say it. Having alternative wording, fallback clauses ready in your drawer is always extremely helpful and helps a lot to speed up contracting processes. If you've gone through discussions on a specific clause with a customer, put the solution you found somewhere in a central repository. You will love yourself 2 months later when you have the same discussion again, when you come to the same point again, and you can recycle what you've done before. And that, of course, should be done by everybody in the team. Building such a, well, let's call it contracting playbook is a great thing, and everybody involved in contracting should be motivated to contribute here. This really, really pays off, and you should really train your teams to do that and to use that and to share the knowledge they gain here. Sorry, I've been talking about availability. It's also a good idea to be able to explain how availability is measured, what must be available to make your platform generally available. Each and every functionality, or is it maybe just the login page? I've seen that. And where do you measure if something is available? And do you calculate availability on a monthly basis or annually? Basically, don't overcomplicate things here. You can, or at least I spend hours and days with IT guys to discuss the details here. But often it's just enough to have a simple explanation for the customer, and that's it. It's, as I said, it's a checkbox exercise, and nobody really cares for the details. Service and support, just one final quick comment, as I've just had that case a few days ago. If you develop individual things for your customer, APIs, functionalities, whatever, it should be clear in the contract if your standard support covers this individual stuff. And it usually should not cover individual deliverables. This can and will kill your support team otherwise. Term and termination. Very quickly, just one sentence. No termination for convenience. Your contract is worth nothing from a revenue recognition perspective if your customer can walk away every month. CFOs and investors don't maybe like that. You see such clauses quite often in customer contracts or contracts coming from the customer. But I think it can be explained to customers that your business model is based on annual subscriptions and that your massive investment in a customer upfront with setup and everything requires at least annual terms. So this is really, I think, an important point from a financial perspective. If you offer a free trial period, it should automatically turn into a paid subscription. You don't want to go through contract negotiations again after the trial period. It's a smooth and elegant and great thing if the contract simply switches over to a full paid subscription after the trial. Auto renewal, that's a great thing. Customers don't, of course, always like auto renewal, but without auto renewal, you'll end up in chaos and customers without real contracts. And I think from my experience, I'd say 1/3 of the payment disputes I've had in my long legal life came from customers out of contract, simply continuing to use the software because nobody thought of switching it off, and then not wanting to pay because, well, there was no contract. That's annoying and painful, I guess. So talking about not paying customers, being contractually able to simply switch off the access to your platform is, I think it's the best way to make customers pay. Forget about these 5% or 8% or whatever interest for default. Nobody ever uses this, but not being able to use the app anymore is a massive motivator to pay an overdue invoice. And you need a clause in your contract allowing such a switching off, and such a clause should definitely be part of your contract. Sometimes customers want kind of a prior warning, which is okay, I guess, and fair. That can be added as a standard, but in general, you should not be obliged to provide your platform to a customer who is not paying you. Limitation of liability, that's always or often the biggest fun in contract negotiations. I don't want to talk about German law here because under German law, it's almost impossible to exclude any liability at all, even in B2B contracts. But also in other jurisdictions, customers often require pretty excessive liability from startups, going into the millions, that usually will kill you if something goes wrong. Limiting liability or limitation of liability negotiations often are a crucial part of the contract negotiations, as already said, simply because you have hard facts and hard figures here, and a number like 1 million as a cap is not such a cloudy legal thing, but it's really a hard figure, and you can discuss that, and you can make a counter offer of 500,000, and then you meet in the middle. But at the end of the day, in my experience, the importance of such discussions, of such liability caps, is often pretty exaggerated. Hard liability cap of 500,000 will not save your butt if you have an issue that affects all of your 1,000 customers, and you have to pay 500,000 1,000 times. I think what is more important is really looking at the specific risks that come with your platform and the specific use cases of the platform, and then trying to practically reduce such real risks as far as possible in the contract. Well, it sounds pretty abstract. 2 or 3 examples, perhaps. The obvious example, of course, is backups, and backups. Make it customers' responsibility to back up their data on a regular basis. May not make too much sense from a practical perspective in a SaaS world. If I store all my data with my SaaS provider. But from a legal and contractual perspective, it makes a lot of sense. If all the data is gone and your customer hasn't backed up as he or she was contractually obliged to, the damage you will have to pay for is pretty limited, because all you have to pay for would theoretically be the recovery of the backup. And if if there is no backup, well, then it's not your problem at the end of the day. So this is really a very important clause in SaaS contracts to oblige the customer to back up the data on a regular basis. Another example for practical risks and mitigation. I've recently drafted terms and conditions for an image processing SaaS platform, kind of Photoshop, something like that. We identified one big financial risk, wrong colors generated by the app, and then 500,000 catalogs ordered by the customer with the wrong colors. Then these catalogs can be shredded, and the financial damage potentially is quite massive. How to mitigate the risk here? Well, we simply added the obligation of the customer to perform a kind of a color-proof test before the 500,000 catalogs are ordered, and then you don't have a financial risk here anymore as a SaaS provider. Because things can go wrong, but if the customer is in breach of such nice little tricky additional duties, that can really save your butt. Finally, my favorite topic, data protection. You are all in the SaaS business, then you all, I think you all love data protection, and you dream of GDPR. And you all will have seen many of these lovely data processing agreement templates from your customers, usually 15, 20 pages with a lot of gaps to be filled in by your IT security guy and so on. I could talk about data protection for hours. I've not done anything else for the last 2 years. It feels like I will not, no worries. My only and admittedly pretty smart ass maybe advice here is do your homework in the area of data protection. Have your stuff ready. You need to have all the standard documents you need here ready in your drawer. In the best case, it doesn't look good. In the worst case, it will be a showstopper if you cannot provide at least a 2-pager with your TOMs, with your technical and organizational measures of data security. That's usually just another procurement checkbox. Nobody can really say if the level of IT security you provide and describe in your TOMs is really appropriate to the risk as the law requires. The TOMs are, well, they are a standard document with an established standard structure and certain buzzwords to be found in there. And if you can provide 2 or 3 pages in that structure and with the relevant buzzwords, that's often enough. And that often really does the job. Well, information security or data protection certifications, by the way, would even be better. And well, when you have the magic ISO 27001 certification, that will save a lot of time, or can save a lot of time during RFP processes, for example, and will save you from completing 20 pages of technical and IT security questionnaires. So yeah, I'm a big fan of certifications, and certifications definitely pay off and definitely speed up many processes, and sometimes are even a requirement to participate in certain RFP processes, especially in the in the public procurement area. Okay, be transparent about your sub-processors. I think that's also important. You should have a list with all your relevant sub-processors ready, and you should be able to say where geographically the data, the personal data, is processed. And if that processing happens outside of the EU, you should know why it is legally okay to transfer personal data to bad and evil countries like the US or India, of course, only from a data protection perspective. And I think, or the other way around, why not explaining in a data protection white paper or something like that, that you are super GDPR compliant and that your data protection management system is awesome and that you have everything in place that you need and even more. This looks something like that looks extremely good and can avoid a lot of questions and save a lot of time in contract negotiations and procurement processes. And before I think I will stop talking about data protection now. Maybe we should have a separate stand-up on data protection later this year. We will see. The last clause I will talk about here, the last clause in SaaS contracts, pretty popular in the last time, I think, is about reference customers. I want to use customer's name and logo as a reference customer. Understandable, of course, every startup needs this massive list of logos on the website. But such a clause allowing you to use your customer's name and logo as a reference is a clause that that every legal guy will highlight and have a problem with, because that's pretty simple. That's pretty simple to redline, that's pretty simple to delete and strike out. Many startups put such clauses in their contracts, as I said, understandable, but is such a clause really helpful? And I think you hear it from the way I ask the question. My legal perspective, in contracts, we create legal obligations. And if the other party is in breach of such a legal obligation, well, then I go to court and enforce the obligation. Does it make sense to enforce a reference? Does it make sense to enforce a testimonial in court? I don't really think so. This is really something that happens in email, that happens later on. That's nothing for a contract, in my humble opinion. It can, of course, be helpful if you're able to put the logo on the website without asking and so on. But such clauses definitely slow your contracting process down, because even if everything else is accepted in a contract, this clause will be highlighted and it will require an amendment, and another 2 or 3 or 4 days go by until this lousy little deletion is approved. And then you're so close to the signature and stand in front of the finish line and can't get across the finish line. And I think that's a pretty elegant transition to our second part here. How to cross the finish line quickly, or in other words, how to efficiently handle the contracting process. Most important point first, you really should try hard to use your paper, your standard contract templates. Your contracts are tailor-made for your product. Your paper has all the legal stuff that is needed for your product, and not more and not less. So it's exactly what is needed to purchase that one product, your platform. Customer standard procurement agreements often come with, 80 pages, a lot of generic stuff, catch-all clauses. Such a standard agreement is used to buy, building material, pencils, and also supposed to buy software as a service. That, of course, doesn't work. That will need massive amendments and a lot of redlining. Your lawyer will, of course, be happy, as this will pay his or her rent for several months if you start negotiating a 90 pages standard Accenture procurement agreement or something like that. But it's no fun, and it's not really fast contracting in SaaS. At the last company I've been with as an in-house counsel, Sprinkler, we worked hard on this. We started at 75% customer contract paper, and over admittedly a longer period of almost 2 years, we could reduce that to 25%. So only 1 in 4 contracts was on customer paper. 3 in 4 contracts were our standard templates. Sometimes, of course, redlined, or almost always redlined, at least a little bit. But it worked, and it worked surprisingly good, because even huge companies, huge corporations that on a first level clearly said, it's our paper only, every supplier has to use our paper, we are whatever you name it, we don't even think about looking at your paper. Even these companies, or some of these companies, could be convinced to use our paper. We measured the contracting period. So how long does it take from exchanging contract paper the first time to signature? And the result was we had a little bit more than 80 days with customer paper. And we had, when we used our standard templates, we had 16 days. So that shows it makes the hell of a difference whose paper you use. Well, convincing people to use your paper requires training for sales, of course. It's of course convenient to be cooperative and friendly and customer focused, and to smile and accept the customer standard contract template for the sales guy. But at the end of the day, it pays off to say no here just once, because if you say yes here once and with a friendly smile accept customer paper, many other no's will have to follow, as you will usually have to massively redline and amend a customer contract to make it work for your specific SaaS solution. And well, then the friendly smile is gone in that moment, and it is not a very good start for your customer relationship. So my experience in general, it's much better for the customer relationship to say no just once in the beginning, and to really try hard to enforce using your paper. And if you explain to sales guys that they will get their commission this quarter instead of next quarter, this can be a massive motivator to convince customers to work with your paper, and it avoids a lot of painful discussions, I promise. Your contracts should be short and sweet and well balanced and fair. Got to click some boxes here, sorry. Short, fair, modular contracts. Yes.
Hi, sorry, I got a question. So
yes, please.
When you mentioned, so when you had a contract from a client, it would take 80 days, but when you had yours, it would be 18. So what were the factors that made it a lot less in your mind to reduce it so that your contract would only be 18 days?
Well, as I said, I think the standard procurement contracts coming from customers usually don't work for SaaS. So you will have to add a lot of stuff around SaaS availability, usage rights, and so on. Customer contracts, of course, are drafted in an extremely customer-friendly way usually. So that will require a lot of work to not to make them provider-friendly, but to make them somehow well-balanced. And as I already said, there is a lot of unnecessary stuff in there that needs to be deleted and struck out. So if you receive a customer contract, or if I as a legal counsel receive a customer contract, I go through it. If I take 80 pages, it takes me like 2 days more or less to go through that and to redline this goddamn contract. And then I send it back. The customer opens the Word doc and it's completely red. Then the customer legal counsel leans back in shock for another 2 days, then starts working on it. 1 week goes by, then it's a lot of work. You get it back with a lot of, what's the next color? Usually green. Then you have a lot of green and red in the contract, needs to change it several times. That sums up to a long period of time. The other way around, you use your paper. 4 or 5 pages in a perfect world, in a perfect contract case, and the customer really only adds what is mandatorily needed from his contracting policy and principles. You have some fallbacks ready and available, and you know that contract by heart, and it's really made for your specific solution. That brings a lot of efficiency and a lot of speed into the process. And my experience, if a customer redlines my standard contract, it takes me 2 hours to send it back, and not 2 weeks. So, and I honestly admit, it's also a psychological thing. If I open a Word document and it shows 79 pages and has a lot of red, well, do I start with that now, today, or maybe tomorrow? Maybe I postpone that to tomorrow, because that's no fun. So of course, all of that is also pretty psychological as well.
Thank you.
Okay. What I was talking about was a short, fair, and modular contract. You can, that's just more or less what I already said. You can draft your contracts in a 100% provider-friendly way, but that's of no use if your contracts never are accepted by the customers and always are heavily redlined, so the other way around, as just described, and renegotiated. And it's a horrible start for a trustful customer relationship this way. And it doesn't really pay off unless you're something like, I don't know, Google, Microsoft, SAP, and you simply don't negotiate your contracts at all and don't talk to people at all. But I guess for now, as long as you're not ruling the world, I really recommend having balanced and fair, tiny little short contracts to make your and your customers' life a lot easier. There are some important clauses, of course, in SaaS contracts, but a solid SaaS agreement can be pretty short and fair without taking too much risk as a provider. 4 or 5 pages, as I just said, can be enough. I think also looking at the customer perspective, if I have the option to go through my own 80 pages together with you, or to go through your 5 pages, I think the decision is pretty clear, I hope, I guess. Your contracts should be modular. It's a good idea to split your contracts in separate bits and pieces and modules. First of all, well, terms and conditions, terms of service, terms of use, framework agreement, master services agreement, whatever it's called like. So the basis, the fundament, we built the church on. Then we have SLA as a separate module, data processing agreement, acceptable use policy if one is needed. This modular approach makes a lot of sense, and it makes your contracts look shorter on the one hand, and you can use these modules, SLA for example, in RFP processes where you will have to add your SLA. And if you should have to use customer paper, this will happen, of course, you can use at least certain modules. Because you will have to use your SLA, and you cannot change your SLA as you provide a single instance platform, and you cannot change the service level for individual customers. So you can reuse, recycle certain of these modules, even if you don't use your contract. And I think the most important thing is to publish your modules, your contracts on your website. Simply reference them in your order form. You send over to the customer your commercial order form and nothing else. Hopefully 2 or 3 pages order form. The order form references and incorporates the terms and conditions published on your website. And the terms and conditions then reference and incorporate all the other stuff like SLA, data processing, and so on. Not only saving paper sending back and forth, but legal terms published on your website look pretty much like carved in marble and non-negotiable, in my opinion, and also in my experience. If I send over a Word doc, it's actually the invitation to add it and to redline it. If I reference something on my website, this is psychologically at least completely different. Maybe this sounds like a cheap trick, but it definitely works. You cannot redline a website. So this is really, I think, one of the most important statements I want to make today. And in this context, also saying everything commercial happens in the offer template. These terms and conditions are well, legal stuff only, nothing commercial, no figures, no numbers in there. And with commercial, I mean pricing, of course, but also any kind of product description, term and termination, and everything else that is flexible and customer specific and changes from customer to customer. Try to avoid having to touch the legal documents. You should move as much as possible into your order form. But it, of course, may happen that a customer dares to ask for changes to your contract. What you then need is really a clear and straightforward internal approval matrix or internal approval requirements. If nobody knows who needs to be asked, if I want to raise the limitation of liability cap from 100 to 250K, that's not really helpful and can cost a lot of time and people are running around and complete chaos. Often, I see that really often sales is left alone with this. Help your contract or help your sales teams to speed this painful process up by clearly saying who's responsible for what and whose competence is it to approve certain changes. That really should be made clear, and that speeds up things a lot as well internally. Many companies have a pretty detailed financial discount approval requirements, but nothing at all for any other changes in the contract. And that's really one of the biggest speed reducers in contracting. Okay. So you now finally have an agreed contract, hopefully, it's important to make it easy to sign. Sounds a little bit funny, but I've seen so many problems with signing contracts, especially when it comes to Christmas and your customer is somewhere in Austria up in the mountain with no printer and no fax available. Make it easy for the customer to accept the contract. E-signature should be fine. Just sending back a purchase order, a fax, email, smoke signals, whatever. I don't care. It's a wrap. We have a contract. I've seen contracts printed, signed, then pictures taken with the iPhone and sent via WhatsApp. Why not? It's a wrap. It's a contract. And your offer template, and that's all I want to say here, your offer template should enable this flexibility and clearly say that we consider it a binding contract if you send a picture via WhatsApp, because then it's a binding contract. And maybe to wrap it all up, everything is marketing. Sorry, I have to say that. You also have to sell your contracts to your customers, and marketing always has to consider the target audience. And the one who reviews your contract has no idea what your platform is and does and what this is all about, and understanding the contract structure and also understanding what kind of magic your app does helps a lot to let the legal guy review your contract in a somehow positive mood. And I honestly admit, and I already said that before, it makes a big difference if I review a contract in a good mood and if I like that supplier, or if I'm maybe just annoyed because the contract comes with Comic Sans font size 7, I've seen that, and wastes my lifetime because it is confusing and I don't understand what it is all about. What helps a lot here is kind of a FAQ one-pager as an introduction to the contract. A first page that explains what this contract is all about, what your app does, what kind of data you process, how the contract is structured, and so on. The legal guy, the one who reviews your contract on the other side, is not a robot, at least not yet. So you really should try to make it as easy as possible for him to get in a positive mood and to want the deal to be done as soon as possible, of course. And such a warm welcome in the form of an FAQ, giving him a hand and explaining what this is all about helps a lot here. So I think that's it from my side. You've done it. It's a wrap. It's a contract. I hope this maybe gave you some wake ideas, what you could improve in your contracting process to speed things up and to make contracting, making contracts less painful for everybody involved. Are there any questions from your side? Nothing for now. Well, you see my contact details if any questions should come up. Feel free to get in touch, please. Looking forward to hearing from you. And well, for now, have a nice evening.